So when we look at the zone of excellence, you're great at it. People want to pay you and you're recognized. And you may even be having impact. However, you won't be absolutely loving what it is that you do. However, in the zone of genius, yes, you are still brilliant at what you're doing, but you're also going to feel as if you're really loving it. You're going to feel very, very on purpose. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Life by Your Design podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Boyd. I'm a master hypnotist, human design reader, and I'm here to help you play with convention, tap into your purpose, and live life by your design. Hello, and welcome back to the Life by Your Design podcast. Welcome to another episode. And if you are one of my regular listeners who shows up every week, it's so nice to have you here with me. And if you're new to the podcast, this is the place where we talk all about how to get on purpose, how to leave a career that you no longer love, and how to live a life completely by your design. So you experience more joy, more vitality, more purpose, and more impact. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking about the genius zone and also the excellence zone. So I want to dive straight in and get into this stuff because essentially, if you are sitting there in a job or a career and you're feeling a bit over it, a bit ready for something else, a little bit as if you know that you're not enough on purpose and this might not really be what you want to be doing with your life, then it's very possible that you are sitting in your zone of excellence as opposed to operating from your zone of genius. And actually, pretty much what I'm doing with clients is helping them to identify that zone of genius and then move into that zone of genius. Because once you get there, that is where all of that vitality, that joy, that purpose, that impact begins to really, really open up for you. And if you're sitting there in your job thinking, yeah, it's time for me to do something else, I don't know what it is, there's often a bunch of reasons why we're considering leaving our career, whether it's we just want our time back, we're feeling stressed and overworked, we're feeling a bit off purpose, we might just want some more time with our kids, or this sense that there has got to be a little bit more meaning. And honestly, once you tap into the zone of genius, all of that stuff that you're craving just starts to appear and to open up. So let's talk about what is the zone of excellence, because I would take a punt that the vast majority of you are in your zone of excellence. So it is, as it sounds, it's the place where you do great work. It's something that you are very good at. You might be a specialist, an expert, or you may simply have lots of experience from being in this career, this space for the last 10 plus 15, 20, maybe more years. It's a place where people want to pay you. It's very easy to stay in the zone of excellence because people want you there because you're damn good at what you do. So you'll find that people ask you to be in your zone of excellence. They want to pay you in your zone of excellence. They want to progress you in your zone of excellence. It's usually the place where we have chosen to place our careers. It's the place where we have spent most of our working life. And there's wonderful things that come from the zone of excellence. There's usually pretty good income. It's what's funding the lifestyle that you have right now. There's a lot of recognition and often some kudos in our zone of excellence. And it's also a pretty safe place because it's a place where often we've spent a lot of time. And in all honesty, our identities are incredibly tied into our zone of excellence. You only have to look at how we tend to begin our conversations here in the Western world when we meet somebody new. So the first thing you say is, oh, hi, I'm so-and-so, and who are you, and what do you do? Yeah? What do you do? And rather than us turning around and going, oh, I do architecture, or I do project management, or I do whatever, we immediately answer with, oh, I'm an architect, or I'm a project manager. We make our careers a really big part of our identity. We make them who we are. And it makes a lot of sense because we spend so much of our week, of our lives in these jobs and doing these activities which equal us to be a certain person. So our zone of excellence is often very, very rooted in our identity. And if you've heard me talk before, when it comes to the subconscious mind, we are always trying to preserve our identity. So it can feel quite tricky to honestly really step away from that zone of excellence because it's where our income is, it's where our identity is, and it's where we're recognized. And it's become such a core element of the person that we are today. But here's the thing with the zone of excellence. As much as we are very good at it and we're paid for it, it's not the thing that really, really lights us up. So depending on where your zone of excellence is right now, you may well be having a lot of positive impact in the world, which is fantastic. But there is a difference between you having impact and you feeling on purpose. When you're on purpose, you will have that sense of fulfillment and you will also be having impact. Whereas, of course, you can have impact without having that full sense of being on purpose, having the meaning, having the fulfillment that goes alongside it. So for a lot of us, the key thing, our next step really is for us to discover what that zone of genius is so that we can move away from our zone of excellence and we can move into that zone of genius where we start to experience those other elements. Before we go any further, though, there's one thing I want you to know about the zone of excellence. And you will have heard me say this for sure on other podcasts. It's something I talk about a lot, is that the thing is, you can always go back to your zone of excellence. It's actually really easy to go back to your zone of excellence because it's the place that people want to pay you. People want to employ you because you're good at it, because you tend to have a good reputation, you have experience, you have qualifications in this area. So if you do decide to be one of those bold people that says, hey, this isn't how I want my life to look, and I'm going to take the leap and I'm going to move away from what I'm doing now and I'm going to do something else as a source of income and I'm going to structure my life so that I have more time and I have more purpose and I have more joy and more vitality and all of these things. If for any reason you later on decide that for some reason you didn't make the correct choice, you could always go back to your zone of excellence. Always. I left my career, I left my zone of excellence. It will be 6 years in August. So we're at the kind of 5.5-year mark at this point. I am still approached regularly with offers to take me back into my zone of excellence because I have a reputation in that area and people want to pay me. Now, I don't want to go back into that area, but it's actually always there as an option. So if you're feeling fearful about leaving your zone of excellence, know that it isn't a one-way door. It's not like when you go out of it, you can't come back. Now, for sure, there's some people who will say having that as a plan B is probably not a good thing. But for a lot of us, there's also a practicality. We've all got rents and mortgages and things that we need to pay. So if for any reason you did decide that you wanted to go back into it, and if you haven't listened to the podcast where I have Helen Leith on from Nakori, and she talks about how she dipped back in and out of Johnson & Johnson, that was her zone of excellence, then it's absolutely an option. So then, if we don't want to stay in the zone of excellence, where do we want to go to? The place that we want to go to is the zone of genius. So when we look at the zone of excellence, you're great at it, people want to pay you, and you're recognized. And you may even be having impact. However, you won't be absolutely loving what it is that you do. You won't be having that unleashed vitality and energy and enthusiasm for the thing that you do. However, in the zone of genius, yes, you are still brilliant at what you're doing, but you're also going to feel as if you're really loving it. You're going to feel very, very on purpose. And a lot of it is going to come very, very natural to you because your zone of genius is essentially the reason why you were put here on the planet. It's the stuff that you are here to bring into the world. It's your skills, it's your attributes, it's the stuff that's sitting in your blueprint. Remember that the zone of excellence very often comes out of social conditioning. It ends up being a path that we find ourselves on when we're living up to the expectations of others. It's madness to me still that we have 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds trying to choose a career for them to do for the rest of their lives. So they choose this area, they go off to university, they study it, and then they come out and tend to fall into something related. And then we stay on that path because we got on that path. Because stepping off that path comes with all these perceived risks. If you step off that path, you challenge the status quo. You walk away from a safe salary. You might have to start again. What if you're not recognized to the same level that you're recognized over here in your zone of excellence? But in the zone of genius, you really, really enjoy what you're doing and you feel genuinely on purpose. So that's great. But at this point, it's quite conceptual, right? It's conceptual, it's abstract. It's like a lot of stuff in the personal development world. So you're like, great, lovely. I'd love to step into my zone of genius. How? How do I discover what my zone of genius is? Now, this is what I'm doing with clients. And this is exactly where we bring in your human design, because your human design is your blueprint. It's your roadmap for this lifetime. So when we look into your human design, your genius is actually laid out for you. So it's there in your defined centers, in your circuitry, in your motivation, in your perception. It's there in your type. It's there in a number of places in this design, which allows you to effectively fast track identifying what this genius is. Because when you're in your zone of excellence, it can be quite hard to think out of that into what it might be that you actually bring to the world. Because of the way the mind works, we fall into the same thought patterns. So we tend to find ourselves going, okay, this is what I'm good at. This is where my skills lie. This is where my experience is. And we just move around in that same space. And yet human design gives us this other framework to understand our genius. Now, I will tell you from my point of view, when I started this process like more than 6 years ago, and I started trying to work out what my genius was even before I left my career, it was a slow process, okay? And I started to get there quite a bit on my own through trial and error. And I retrained, I tried new things, and I knew that I was sort of maneuvering into this place, which was the right sort of place. Then human design popped into my world, and I started to look into my human design, and I could see it in there. And in a different space, not the podcast, I will share with you in a lot more detail what that actually looks like. But to give you a little bit of a flavor, when I first opened up and looked at one of the key gene keys or gates that sits in my design, which is gene key or gate, because they're interchangeable, 18, which is in my vocation, I open it up and I look at it, and the title is The Healing Power of the Mind. And as I am a master hypnotist, and what I do is I help people to leverage the power of their mind to heal and to evolve and to move into the next level version of themselves. I've also got some other key circuitry that sits in my design. One of them is the channel of surrender. And when you look at actually what the job of that circuitry is, it's there for you to actually be able to see the patterns that increase joy, and very specifically, behavioral patterns. And again, this is exactly what I'm working with. And what's interesting is I've always been able to see behavioral patterns. It's always been very, very clear to me. And because I actually used to work in the culture strategy space, what I was always looking for when I went into organizations was behavioral patterns. And for me, they would just pop up I could see them really, really easily. And what I've done leaving that career and then moving into what I do now is I've gone out and I've sought the actual professional training and qualifications and additional tools that help me to see those patterns. But actually, I've always been able to see those patterns. And here we're just talking about a very small part of my human design, but you can see how it starts to point to what my genius actually is. And it's very much around patterns and around thinking and changing the way that we think, which is why my keynote talks are around developing unconventional thinking. So when you start to look into your genius in your human design, what you've got is an option to shortcut you trying to work out what are the components of my genius. And what I do with you is actually a 5-step process. And the first part is looking at your design. And the other parts of that process is how do we take that genius and how do we play with it and explore it and turn that into something which you can create income from, and then make sure we structure everything around that so that you're able to fully live life by your design, your human design, but also exactly what you want your life to look like so you completely thrive. So if you're sat there and you're going, I do not have my human design, you can get your chart for free from my website. You just go to michelleboyd.com/human design chart. Link will be in the show notes, and you can get that for free. And then what we can do is we can look into that chart and we can pull out your genius. And so if I was almost to summarize how a lot of this process goes for people, is there is a recognition that I want to spend my time in a different way because I don't feel as if I'm getting as much purpose, as much impact as I'd like. Life doesn't have as much meaning as I want. I'm overworked. I'm stressed. I'd like my time back. And then once you've had that level of recognition in yourself, the next thing is to start to explore that genius zone. And that's where your human design comes in. And then from that point onwards, we can start to look at how we bring that genius alive. Because the genius zone is that place where you are going to feel fantastic. You are going to love what you do, and you are going to see those positive ripples from the work you do reach out into all of the corners of your life and the world around you. And that's why I feel so passionate about moving people from zones of excellence into zones of genius. So that is where I will leave you today. Have a contemplate about where your zone of genius might be. And I would expect, as it's in my example, that some of your genius is already there in your life. You're already seeing elements of it, but it might just not be really, really in your conscious awareness because that's not the way that we are programmed to look at what we bring as value. So go ahead, grab your human design chart, and I will see you on next week's podcast.